There's a lot of conflicting information about the accuracy of food sensitivity tests. I know that I took a lot of them myself, and I think every time I had different results, and sometimes it would flag foods that were staples within my diet and that I viewed as safe. There are lots of types of tests, but I've done the kind where they test the skin, and I've done the kind that they go through blood work. And the assumption with any food sensitivity test is that the food is the direct culprit and nothing else is going on. But the tests are identifying the presence of antibodies and confirming the presence of inflammation in the body. What the tests don't capture is that a dysregulated nervous system or overload from stress hormones can also be responsible for that inflammation, where the body is simply unable to break down that particular food as a result. It's possible to resolve the food sensitivity by using the brain as the messenger to switch into the parasympathetic nervous system, which supports digestive processes. If you have sensitivities to many different things, whether they're food or scents or environmental components or other products, it may be a good indication that food is not the culprit, but that the system itself is dysregulated. And in terms of brain retraining, it's important to first reach a place of neutrality emotionally and mentally with the foods. That way you can have more neutral ground to attempt any reintroduction of the foods. I had to reframe my thoughts and associations with foods and remove the fear part of it by educating myself in the opposite. There are so many different opinions and dietary claims with foods that it can be confusing to navigate, and there is rarely unanimous consensus, so I tried to abandon ideas of good versus bad foods. If I believed a food was bad or harmful, I'd seek out research that told me otherwise about the benefits to help balance out that view. And I would look to past joyful memories where the food might have been part of my diet, and I replay those so it felt more possible to me in the present or in the future. And if such an example didn't exist, I would focus on cuisines that the food was part of and celebrate the country or the culture so that I could get a broader sense of joy from thinking about those ingredients. As for reintroduction, I feel like it works best when it happens incrementally. So it can start with visualizing the food, smelling the food, taking a bite out of the food, eating a meal with a tiny bit of the food mixed in, or eating the food as a larger part to the meal. It's about what is personally within level of comfort to do, but slightly on the edge of that comfort zone so that you can grow and expand from there over time and practice. I believe they can, depending on the source of the infection and whether the environment of the body and the nervous system branches are functioning optimally. If they aren't, then chronic infections can take place where the body doesn't really heal and the infections are recurring. Brain retraining can help that aspect so that the body can then move into a place that supports healing without recurrence. So much. I was sensitive to everything, and the issues that I had with my eyes were one of the harder things for me to accept because my vision was an important aspect of how I defined myself as an artist. I had many eye symptoms, and I'll post an infographic tomorrow about the nervous system branches to further explain how the brain can be used to support healing for things that are all over the body, like in our digestive system and also our senses, like sight, taste, smell, and hearing, even our tactile ability and coordination. MCAS was not one of my diagnoses, but I had severe allergic reactions that did include anaphylaxis, while I had a menu of other conditions going on at the same time that affected my heart rate, my blood pressure, my balance, and temperature regulation. So who knows? I did have histamine intolerances, and I tried to address it by eliminating foods. But doing that didn't really improve anything for me. I had a very limited diet in doing all of that elimination, When I started to add foods back in, I started with the foods that I didn't have any known reactions to, but had been suggested by a certain diet protocol. I also added back in ones that I had been out of my diet for the shortest time. Some of the foods I eat now, I went 20 years without eating, and some foods I had never tried before because food issues were something that I developed in childhood. And this progress was made through brain retraining and incrementally training on adding the foods back in. I think learning to trust your body is a very important step. If you feel better when you're not cutting out foods, I think that's a good indication of what direction to go. I can speak for my own experience and confirm that both gluten and dairy were out of my diet as a means of symptom management, but I didn't really feel completely better from that step. It sort of alleviated some of the pressure that was on my body to process certain things because it wasn't in a place where it could take on any more stress, physically or mentally. In managing that stress through brain retraining and rebalancing my nervous system that way, my symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome resolved, and it was not isolated to the food. Even in adding the food back in, my body was capable of processing it and using it as fuel. I let go of certain protocols or rules, knowing I was still healing my body and supporting my recovery through the brain retraining practice. This question really speaks to me because a large part of my restriction was due to being told certain foods were bad for me or unsafe, and not because I had a particular reaction that qualified that assessment. Although I did have foods that I did react to or was allergic or intolerant to, I had a whole lot of foods that I eliminated from my diet simply out of fear of getting worse or doing damage. I followed health programs and diets that declared foods as bad or good, unsafe or safe, and that created a relationship with food based on black and white thinking. Food's relationship to wellness is a complicated relationship. Even our thoughts or behaviors around food can be more harmful to wellness than the food itself. It's great that you have the awareness that you're experiencing fear and you're able to label it as that. It's also helpful to know a source that is helping to fuel that fear or the rhetoric that certain foods should be feared. For me, I ended up unfollowing those types of accounts because they represented an opinion or theory and not 100% fact. Some of those theories are based on outdated ideas or have science that now contradicts it. A major shift is in removing that emotional layer or fear around food came when I started to instead follow dietitians and nutritionists that aligned with this concept of intuitive eating. I would encourage you to look into intuitive eating to reach more neutrality with foods or specific ingredients. If it's helpful, I can also make suggestions about particular accounts that might be helpful to follow in another post. This relates to the question that I just answered, so I would encourage again some research into intuitive eating. This is a book that I found very helpful for my journey. There's a newer version that was released, I believe, in June of 2020. I think one important thing that I learned with reintroduction of those kinds of foods was the concept of moderation, and not to base my decision to eat something or not from a place of emotion, but more from a place of neutrality or logical thinking. So if I made the choice to eat something processed, I knew that one time wasn't going to be detrimental, and my body was more than capable of digesting it because I had built up its strength and resilience through rebalancing my nervous system from brain retraining. I focused my food choices primarily on meeting my body's nutritional needs, so I wasn't going into extremes of the other direction by eating mindlessly just because things became available to me again, but by tuning into what felt good for my body. And sometimes that meant having a treat or something that was previously out of my diet because of certain protocols. Intuitive eating was really helpful to leaving behind such protocols, and brain retraining showed me that the food wasn't the isolated issue, but that my body's mechanics were in need of rewiring on a more functional level, which I did via brain retraining. I believe it can, particularly in cases where more traditional protocols are not resolving it or it is recurring or chronic. That's where I believe it can be really helpful to look more holistically at the body to see if functionally it's optimized or if things are dysregulated elsewhere as well. Brain retraining allows you to get to the bottom of nervous system dysregulation and change any non-conscious behaviors that are contributing to keeping the body stuck in this state of dysregulation. I started by following my doctor's advice and eliminating all the foods that were part of the anti-Candida diet. And it seemed to help the inflammation for a little while, but I found myself to be emotionally not in a great place because of how restrictive my options were around mealtime. I was down to about 3 bland meals that were on constant rotation, and it was a sad way to live. And when I had more testing done, it was still showing as present, which really upset me because there wasn't anything else to eliminate from my diet. When I started to understand more about the brain's involvement in this condition, particularly when there are already other issues related to nervous system dysregulation, I realized that food wasn't the problem, but my brain was missignaling to the rest of my body. So prior to reintroduction, I focused first on mindset to reach a more neutral association with the foods. I mentioned intuitive eating in a couple of the answers already because that was a huge help for me to build that less emotional or fearful relationship with food. I would incrementally add things back into my diet when I felt to be comfortable with the idea of doing so and see how my body reacted. It was a gradual process, and in the beginning I would do small quantities or just one ingredient at a time. I would make sure I was in a good headspace and pay attention to any thoughts that contributed to a stress response so I could offer myself more supportive chemistry and not influence or create any reactions just from those thoughts. I was able to see more clearly that the food wasn't the problem, but my thoughts and emotions about the food were a large part of it. This was something I struggled with personally because I was adamant that my food sensitivities and issues were separate from the rest of the limbic system impairment issues because I had the food stuff happening since I was a child. And I didn't realize at the time, but my nervous system was already dysregulated early on in my life. So I didn't really have a sense of my baseline until I got further along in brain retraining as an adult. Food was not something I went too deeply in at the beginning of the rewiring journey. I added the foods I wasn't really imprinted by first and focused on other areas of rewiring mainly. It wasn't until I traveled, about a year after starting brain retraining, that I saw how much fear I held around certain foods and how stressful or challenging avoidance was of those foods. That experience gave me the courage to try because I saw how the relationship with foods was not helping my recovery. It was a stressor for me, and I felt it in my heart that the best thing I could do for myself was to try and explore and see what was actually possible for me. So I let go of the protocols and I started to trust more in my body's ability to filter and digest. I was making strides in so many other areas through brain retraining that I reached a place where I felt I was supported to try to open up my world to more food. I remembered that the food wasn't an isolated part of the inflammation or symptoms. It was that my body wasn't optimized to process it, but through brain retraining, it gets rebalanced. And incremental training is a way to see what's possible, and it can be most supportive to approach that with a neutral mindset so that thoughts or feelings aren't influencing or producing chemistry that will support inflammation. When you focus on that aspect of it, it becomes clear what foods are contributing. And in my case, I learned what foods helped me feel more vibrant or supported energy levels best, and I understood the inflammatory issues as more related to stress hormones. from management of thoughts or experiences, which I was empowered to change. So I didn't need to rely on changing my diet in order to find relief.